Yeah, all things in time, one thing at a time. And you hear the phrase all things in time, and that's a pretty overwhelming idea. And usually that just means be patient. But for all things to come in time, you need to focus on one thing at a time. And I was listening to an interview some months ago with Alex Gray, of all people, and he said, one line at a time with regards to drawing, one line at a time. And it's so simple, and it's something I already kind of knew. But usually, epiphanies are simple things that you already kind of knew, which is why they end up being so profound. And it's funny because I associate Alex Gray with like my college drug dealer's campus apartment, like that sort of existential neutral hell that you're in when you're just staring at some Alex Gray art printed off a computer on your drug dealer's wall as he weighs out a 20 sack. And I couldn't be more indifferent toward Alex Gray as an artist. I could not be more indifferent. I don't hate his art. I don't have any real opinion on it one way or another. I think probably the context in which I first saw it, and I'd seen it long before I was buying a 20 sack at my dealer's campus apartment. But I think the context in which I saw it, like Tool fans, I think Tool used his artwork, and I couldn't be more indifferent about Tool, honestly. So I'm not trashing it. Sometimes when you say you're indifferent about something or that you don't have an opinion on it, people almost hear that as you don't like it. And it's true, I don't like that stuff, but I don't dislike it either, hence being indifferent. And I'm not ambivalent. It's not competing emotions. It's simply just total indifference. And Alex Gray is an incredibly successful, talented artist. I acknowledge that. But someone being successful and talented doesn't necessarily mean you like it either. Um, all those fans mean something. What do you mean you don't like it? 20 million people can't be wrong, but 100 people can. I don't know, where am I going with that? But anyway, I think sometimes if somebody is really successful and talented at something and you don't like them, that's even more reason to listen to them. And I think with Alex Gray, that's a great example. But really, I think because he's somebody who I don't particularly like, and I was listening to him on a podcast that I do listen to, and him saying, just focus on one line at a time, it had a much more profound impact. It was a much bigger epiphany than it would have been if it was somebody that I liked, if it was somebody that I was already a fan of. Because if you're already a fan of somebody, you're so biased that you don't really process the information they give you objectively. And because you're not processing the information objectively, you're far less likely to actually have that sort of epiphany, to have that profound moment. I would almost compare it to like college girls who have a huge crush on their professor, and they go to class and they hang on every word he says and they listen to him. But really, it's all processed through this doe-eyed crush world. Where they're not really hearing his lectures objectively, and I don't believe they're processing the information as clearly as they could. What a biting criticism of college girls just for having crushes on a professor. But really, I think that's true. It's kind of the same thing. Think about a guy. Let's be fair here. Think about a guy who's just on a date with a girl he's very attracted to, and he's sitting there and he's nodding along to everything he says, and he doesn't necessarily have a problem with what she's saying, but he's acting like it's so interesting. He's acting like he's hanging on every word on this date. But really, he doesn't give that much of a shit about what she's saying, and he might not even be listening. He's just thinking, I like this girl, I like this girl, I like this girl, which is exactly what I'm going to say on my next date out loud. Now, if I have another date ever again in my life, I'm just going to show a girl this video where I'm just like, I like this girl, I like this girl. I'm just going to loop me saying that, and it'll go really well. But really, people, if they're already fans of somebody, if it's a musician they like and they're a fan, a full-blown fan, they have a case of full-blown fanhood, chances are they're not listening as objectively as they could, and it's all just kind of feeding into the fanatic part of their brain. It's already feeding into this existing positive space. This existing positive space. And so when you listen to somebody that you're indifferent towards or you don't like, and they say something that is meaningful to you, it almost has a greater impact, and it's going to affect your life in a better way. And I would even extend that to somebody that you cannot stand. I would say that's even more true. If it's somebody you can't stand, and they might be everything, they might represent everything that you don't like, everything you hate, if you feel that passionate, and they say something that is meaningful to you or profound, and you can acknowledge that to yourself, that is going to be huge, because that means that that piece of information cut through all of this negative shit that you associate with that person. It cut through everything, and that's how profound it is. And I don't feel that strongly about Alex Gray, if I need to say that again. So he's not a great example, but I think it can happen politically. I think it can happen, someone who might be extremely far left, they're not going to be objectively listening to anything that a right-wing person says. And so even if someone on the right wing, and it goes both ways, obviously, both wings go both ways. But if that right-wing person says something that could have a profound impact on the far left person, that far left person just cannot let themselves acknowledge it. They just cannot imagine that that person has anything to offer. And that's unfortunate, because there is a lot of information to be gained. And that doesn't mean you have to change your opinion of that person. Just because someone offers you something that you can use doesn't mean you have to stop hating them. And it doesn't mean you have to turn around and tell all your friends you're a fan of them, or even that you got that piece of insight from them. You can process it yourself and make it matter inside of, you can add it to your own internal process, and you don't have to turn around and say, hey, Hitler's a bad guy, but he had this one point that I like. You don't have to turn around and say that. You can just let it resonate with you, and and let it impact you. But you have to acknowledge it within yourself. You have to be open to acknowledging it, and that's the hardest part of all. But if something does cut through everything and you can use it, why not? Go back to my video I made a while back where it was, if you're climbing a cliff face, you can't pick and choose. And if you're not happy with where you are and you're climbing a cliff, you can't pick or choose which rocks to grab or which direction to go. You have to grab the ones that are going to get you where you need to go. And sometimes that involves going down and going to the side, but ultimately you have to grab hold of the rocks that are sticking out that are going to take you where you need to go. Only if you're not happy with where you're at. Because if you're totally fine with where you're at, just hanging onto the cliff face, which all of us are going to do no matter what, anyway, then I can't tell you what to do. If you're fine hanging out with where you're at, there's no way I can tell you which rock to grab. But I can tell you that if you're not happy with where you're at, you cannot afford to choose which rocks you're going to grab. We're talking about grabbing rocks. So that's why you should listen to people who you may not agree with. And it's easy with people. Start if it's hard for you. If you can't listen to people who you ideologically, if you're just so ideologically psychotic that you can never listen to anybody who disagrees with you, start out with somebody who you're just indifferent toward. But the unfortunate part about that kind of psychosis, that weird social psychosis, is people who are going through it often treat people who they are indifferent toward as enemies. It's that with us or against us thing. And that's the worst of all, man. That's the saddest thing of all. And one of the biggest problems we're dealing with is that people treat indifference as the opposite. They treat it like it's the enemy, like it's something other than what it is, because if they don't agree with you, they must be against you. That's just an unfortunate thing that's always been a part of things. Poor old Alex Gray. He's my enemy. No, he's just some guy out there who does art and he's really good at it. He's successful. And because I don't like him and he's successful, because I'm indifferent toward him and he's successful, he must have some insight into something. And by insightful, I mean he's good at what he does. I don't mean money. I don't mean fans. I mean he's objectively good at what he does. You can't deny that. So to go back to his idea, though, of one line at a time, I mean, this morning I was drinking a cup of coffee and I was thinking about my next cup of coffee, and that's so stupid. It's honestly one of the dumbest. When I realized I was doing that, I was like, I haven't even finished this cup of coffee and I'm already thinking about my next cup of coffee. And that's just sort of a in the moment sort of thing. You got to remember to stay in the moment and be mindful. And that's the thing, too, about drawing is if you're drawing and you start thinking about the next line other than the one you're working on, that's going to take you out of your flow state. Michael Jordan, when he was playing basketball, I doubt he was thinking about his next basket. When he was he probably wasn't. That's what I've heard is like when you're in that kind of flow state, and I've been in flow states, but like a Michael Jordan level flow state, not only is he not thinking about his next basket and he's focusing on the current basket he's going to make, he's probably not even thinking that hard about the current basket, because when you're in a flow state like that, so much comes automatically. And I know that the best lines I make when I'm drawing, I looked at myself as I made that hand motion. Had to make sure. See, I was thinking outside of never mind. I was thinking about the next basket. That's stupid. But I know when I'm thinking too hard about the line, even if I am focused in on the one line that I'm working on, if I'm thinking too hard about that one line, I'm probably going to fuck it up. But whereas if I'm just focused on that one line, but going with the flow of it, as much as I hate to say that, going with the flow of it, it's going to turn out better. Even if it's not exactly what I wanted, it's going to turn out better, is something I've found. But yeah, one line at a time. Even if you're doing coke, even if it's something somewhat negative. I mean, coke doesn't have to be negative for everybody, I guess, but it's obviously a self-destructive thing. And even if you're doing coke, in the same way that you should be focused on your current cup of coffee, focus on that first line of coke, one line at a time. Don't focus on the next line of coke. You should be focused on the one that you currently have in front of you. And yeah, let's go there. This whole talk ended up being all about cocaine. That's what my whole point was. All this talk about clean living and healthy living and making the right decisions. It all ended up just me telling you to focus on your next line of coke, your current line of coke, rather than the one after that. So much for basketball, so much for art, so much for listening to people that you agree with or disagree with. Just do coke. But I don't know. I think, all things in time, things will come. The bigger picture this is going to be really stupid sounding, but it's true. But the bigger picture will come together and reveal itself, all things in time, if you do focus on one line at a time. It's like cleaning your house. It can feel totally overwhelming when you think about how your entire house is a mess. But when you just focus on that one little corner and come up with a plan of action and kind of spread it around. And, some people, their systems, like if some people approach their house where it's like, I'm going to start in this corner and work clockwise and do that. And some people do that with drawing. They think, I'm going to do this quadrant. You see where some people even divide their drawings into graphs, and they think like, I'm going to fill in this entire quadrant before I get to the next one. And I don't really have that approach. I have a much more controlled chaos approach for cleaning my house and for drawing, for that matter. I think it's something I do in a lot of different situations, which is I have kind of a system in place, but I kind of jump around. Like I focus on one line at a time or one area at a time, but I might jump around to a completely different area if that feels like it's the intuitive or right thing to do. And I kind of do that with my house when I'm cleaning it as well. But it is a system, and I think that's the important part, is you should try to get into that flow state and try to get into that mode, but you should also have a system for it. And I think that those flow states come through a system. They come through discipline. You think about a star athlete, and they're some of the most disciplined people in the world. And when they get into that Michael Jordan type flow state, it's because of how disciplined they are in every other respect. They're practicing, they're training, their health, their diet, all of that leads them on the path to getting to that flow state during the game, where they make 100 baskets and 200 rebounds. All of that leads them there. And I think it's important to remember that. I think it's important to remember that a system isn't necessarily fun. Coming up with a system for yourself is not necessarily fun. And in some ways, it feels like you're taking the magic out of something when you have a system. But when you have a system in place, doing that one line at a time will lead you to the bigger picture. Because if there's no system in place, the one line might go nowhere. You might just have nothing. You might just be one line by itself in a modern art gallery. One line, one little pen stroke in the middle of a big white canvas, and a bunch of people love it. And maybe that's good sometimes. Sometimes it's good just to not have a bigger picture and just to do one little thing. And I'm spiraling out of control here because now I'm justifying the idea of doing one little pen stroke on an entire blank sheet of paper. But getting a system in place first, I think, is important before you do that one line. And I think you'll get a system in place by failing a little bit. I think you have to fail and know your boundaries in order to get a system in place. That's certainly what's been the case for me. And listening to Alex Gray just changed my life. I'm the biggest Alex Gray fan in the world. I have such a crush on Alex Gray's art. I like weird, cosmic, muscular diagrams of human consciousness. No, but that's the funny thing too. I need to finish this up because I'm losing focus. I got ahead of myself. But the funny thing is, just because someone says something that profoundly affects you doesn't mean you will become a fan of them. Like, I didn't become a fan of Alex Gray after that. I'm still not a fan, even though I've made an entire video out of one little sentence he said. And I think that's people's biggest worry when they think about acknowledging something that comes from someone they don't like or something from someone they hate. They think, oh God, if I acknowledge what the Antichrist said, I'm going to become a fan of the Antichrist. And that's not true. You'll just, that one thing will just fit into your system. And I want to talk too about the phrase, don't get ahead of yourself, because I feel like that's a negative version of one line at a time. And don't get ahead of yourself essentially means, it means exactly what it says. It means just don't think any farther ahead than you need to, because that's when you fuck up. That's when you get out of your flow state. That's when you start fucking up your lines because you're thinking too far ahead. But what I don't like about the phrase, don't get ahead of yourself, is it's kind of negative and undefined. And when I've been told things like don't get ahead of yourself, that fucks me up. It sends me into this weird existential cycle where I'm thinking too hard about what it means to not get ahead of myself. I'm like, fuck, am I getting ahead of myself? What does that mean? What does it mean to get ahead of myself? When the constructive side of that, the more positive version of that, is one line at a time, because you're thinking about what you're doing. I'm making this line. I'm drawing this line. You're not thinking about this crazy existential question of like, am I getting ahead? Am I going too far? Do I need to slow down? And that just puts the brakes on you. And it's like stopping at a stop sign, but you have no idea where you're going after that. I mean, the whole point of using your brakes when you're in a car is the fact that you are going somewhere. You have a destination and you have to stop along the way because there's a stop sign. And that's essentially what a phrase like don't get ahead of yourself should mean. Stop at that stop sign when it comes up, but don't forget about your destination. And this is the world I'm in, The world I'm in now is this cliche. It's this basic. It's this stupid motivational quote dissection, but it's good. It's part of the system. Alex Gray quotes, car metaphors, every cliche under the sun, baby. But one cliche at a time, one line at a time.